Originally established as the pivot point of the weekly cycle, the seventh day stood for thousands of years as the seal of the Creator's power and authority. During the lifetime of Jesus Christ, contention and debate raged over the issue of proper Sabbath keeping. In Part 3 of The Seventh Day, Hal Holbrook and experts from around the world chronicled the struggle to replace the seventh-day Sabbath with Sunday as the Christian day of worship. The story is woven into the history of medieval Europe, and it continues to shape the customs of most Christians even today. And now, Part 4 of The Seventh Day, Revelations from the Lost Pages of History.
I am Ivan Karitzin. I pray for courage to die a noble death today. I will die for my faith, for the truth that I have loved. I will die because of those things that I have believed and taught according to the Holy Scriptures, both Old Testament and New. I will die today because I have observed the seventh day of the week as the holy Sabbath of God. How did it come to this fiery death? I had such hopes. I had visions of the whole Russian church reforming, reviving the pure truth of the gospel. But now it comes to an end. Ivan III. He could not stay away. Once he was our friend. I wonder what is in his heart today. Look there. Elena and Dmitri, Sobotniks, Sabbath keepers like me. The Tsar's own daughter-in-law. His grandson. What will become of them? Will they burn too? Ah, Sophia. She should be happy today. She was against us from the very beginning. And Gennady, the Archbishop from Novgorod, he has lived for this day, for this fire. He claims that we have turned away from Christ and become like the Jews. But I am a Christian, and I die today for love of Christ and His Word.
Those horrific fires in Moscow 500 years ago signaled the death of the 15th century Russian Reformation, a Reformation characterized by its emphasis on observing Saturday, the seventh day, as the Sabbath. Hello, I'm Hal Holbrook. Welcome to part 4 of the seventh day, Revelations from the Lost Pages of History. The man in the cage, Ivan Kurizin, was a prominent Russian theologian and a leader of the religious uprising that historians call the Novgorod-Moscow movement. The Tsar Ivan the Great found this movement already well established in Novgorod when he seized control of that city around 1480. Ivan found that 2 Russian Orthodox priests were at the heart of the movement. He invited them to Moscow. Dr. Oleg Jigenkov explains.
The reason Tsar Ivan brought the 2 most prominent priests, Denis and Alexei, from Novgorod to Moscow was that he himself was somehow sympathetic to the reformers' views. And Ivan installed them to be the priests at the 2 most important cathedrals in Moscow, in Russia, in Arkhangelsky Cathedral and at the Armenian cathedrals. Those 2 cathedrals are still the most important cathedrals in Russia.
But the Tsar wasn't the only one who was pro-reform. The Novgorod-Moscow movement reached into the highest levels of government and included people in the Tsar's inner circle. The whole story reads like a great Gothic novel. On the one hand, you've got Elena Stefanovna, widowed daughter-in-law of the Tsar. And she's a sabotnik. That is, she's a Sabbath keeper. On the other hand, there's the Tsar's wife, actually his second wife, Sophia, a Greek princess by birth. She grew up in Italy under the influence of the Roman Catholic leaders, who hoped that her marriage to the Tsar would pull the Russians closer to the Church of Rome. But Sophia eventually adopted the Russian Orthodox religion. So Tsar Ivan is caught between these 2 women, both of whom have great influence on him and his court. And the 2 of them are on opposite sides of the religious controversy. But the plot thickens. Elena's son, Dmitri, Ivan's grandson, is in line to become the next Tsar. And Dmitri, like his mother, supports the Sabbath-keeping reformers. Now, Sophia, remember, she's the Tsar's second wife, bore him a son named Vasily, and she wants her son to become Tsar after Ivan, and she'll stop at nothing to get her way. Sophia has a powerful ally in Gennady, the Russian Orthodox Archbishop of Novgorod. Gennady is a zealous, even fanatical enemy of the Sabbath-keeping reformers. He calls for extreme measures. Listen to this.
And in some of his letters addressed to the Russian Tsar, Gennady venerates the methods of Spanish Inquisition and insists that the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian state should apply these methods towards the Russian Subotniks movement.
Russian Orthodox Church leaders met at the Council of Moscow and condemned the reformers as heretics. The sentence of the council details the charges.
Some of you said blasphemy against many holy icons, and some of you cut the holy icons and burned them with fire. And you have all honored the Sabbath more than the resurrection day of Christ.
Now, of course, the resurrection day is Sunday, first day of the week. The council accused these reformers of honoring the seventh day, the Sabbath, more than the first day, Sunday. And that's what united their movement. The Council of Moscow was the beginning of the end for the Novgorod-Moscow movement. It eventually died in the flames of Red Square. Elena Stefanovna and her son Dmitri fell out of favor. Their fate is unclear. Tsar Ivan III died, and Sophia's son Vasily took his place, just what his mother wanted. Early in the 16th century, the Muslim kingdom of Adal attacked the Christian empire of Ethiopia. This was a jihad, a Muslim holy war, backed by the powerful Ottoman Turks. It took over vast areas of the country, overwhelming the Ethiopian forces. In desperation, the emperor appealed to Portugal for aid. Several long and difficult years passed, and finally, in 1541, Portuguese troops arrived on the coast of what is now Eritrea. Cristobal da Gama, son of the famous navigator Vasco da Gama, commanded a band of 400 musketeers. Their mission, rescue Christian Ethiopia. It was a costly effort. In their first major battle, the Portuguese took heavy casualties. Da Gama himself was captured and beheaded by the Muslim commander. Fortunately, with the help of the surviving Portuguese force, Emperor Golaudus beat back the invaders in 1543, ending the Muslim threat. But a few years later, a new challenge to Ethiopia's Christianity appeared when Jesuit missionaries followed in the footsteps of the Portuguese troops, facing privation, captivity, torture, and death. These Jesuits devoted themselves to bringing the Ethiopian Church into the Roman Catholic fold. But there were major differences between the Ethiopian Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, not the least of which was that the Ethiopians observed the seventh-day Sabbath, a practice that dated back at least 1,000 years. Still, the Jesuit missionaries persisted. Finally, Emperor Susenyos embraced the Roman Catholic Church and professed his allegiance to the Pope. In 1622, he proclaimed Roman Catholicism the official religion of his empire. Afonso Mendez, a Jesuit priest, arrived in Africa as the newly appointed patriarch of the Ethiopian Church. He was eager to stamp out the traditions of the Ethiopian Church, especially Sabbath keeping. With Mendez urging him on, Emperor Susenyos issued a proclamation requiring his people to work on the Sabbath, a desecration of the holy day. That was a big mistake.
Both the clergy and the people, everybody turned it against him. They didn't accept his proclamation. It was only the nobles, the kings, and his subjects in the palace were the only ones who were keeping the Roman faith.
A violent wave of protests swept over the land. The people rebelled. They refused to give up their traditional religion. Susenyos saw his good intentions trigger a bitter civil war. There were thousands of casualties. Amid the chaos and bloodshed came a voice of reason.
Fasilidas, one of his sons, talked to his father, Susenyos, and said, "Look at how many people you have killed. How many are you going to kill again? These people are not pagans, they are not Muslims. They are our people. Some of them are your relatives." And he convinced his father that what he did was wrong. Susenyos passed another edict, finally, and said, "When I accepted the Roman faith, I thought it was good for the people. But now, even the ignorant peasants choose to die to keep their tradition than accepting the new faith. Therefore," he said, "I will step down and give my kingdom to my son Fasilidas. From now on, he said, you are free to worship the way you want. In your churches, in your communities, you are free.
Even today, the observance of the seventh-day Sabbath, together with Sunday, is common in Ethiopia, the nation with the world's longest history of Christian Sabbath keeping. Imagine this. You wake up one morning to the sound of policemen pounding on your door. They handcuff you and throw you into the back of a squad car and haul you off to jail without telling you why. They confiscate all your belongings and seize your life savings. You spend months in a lonely cell, wondering why you're there. Now and then the guards take you to be questioned by detectives, but it's a strange kind of interrogation. They want you to tell them why you've been arrested. They say there are 7 or 8 witnesses against you, but they won't say who they are. They want you to guess that too. Sometimes they torture you. You try to think of who it was that accused you of whatever crime you're supposed to have committed. And then you begin to name names, hoping to hit on the right ones. Sometimes they promise to let you go, but only if you cooperate. So eventually, you begin to make things up, to confess to things you've never done, hoping to satisfy them. After a year or so, they take you to a courtroom with several other prisoners. A judge is reading out the sentences. Some prisoners are getting off easy. Others are getting life in prison. Some are getting the death penalty. What will you get? Maybe that scenario gives you at least an inkling of what it was like to live in the grip of the infamous Inquisition, a diabolical scheme for identifying and eliminating religious dissent.
The Inquisition in Europe in the Middle Ages had its own rationale, its own justification. The first justification was that this life is so much less important than the life to come, and that therefore, if a person's earthly life was taken away for the sake of his or her immortal soul, you were doing a favor to that person. However, it has to be said that the other rationale of the Inquisition was not so much to sentence people to death, through burning usually, but to reclaim the person, to persuade them to return to the bosom of Holy Mother the Church.
Pope Gregory IX established the medieval Inquisition back in 1231 to protect the Catholic world from heretics and religious rebels. The Inquisition was a highly organized operation, combining the powers of both church and state. It was a devastating weapon. Simply put, it got results. In 1469, the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella merged the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile into the United Kingdom of Spain. By the way, this is the same Ferdinand and Isabella who sent Christopher Columbus on his voyage of discovery in 1492. The new king and queen were militantly Catholic. In fact, they are called the Catholic monarchs. But they had to face the fact that their Spain was not as Catholic as they wanted it to be. You see, a generation or two earlier, the Jews of Spain had been compelled to convert to Catholicism under threat of deportation and loss of possessions. Now, these forced converts were called New Christians, and the title stuck. They were baptized Roman Catholics, but some of them, perhaps many of them, retained some traditional Jewish customs, like observing the seventh day, Saturday, as the Sabbath. Queen Isabella saw this as a serious desecration of the true Catholic religion. So in 1478, she persuaded the Pope to authorize the Spanish Inquisition. She wanted to purge her church of any taint of Jewish heresy.
The Inquisition in Spain and Portugal devoted a great deal of its energy and its attention to wheedling out these people, to detecting these people who on the face of it were Roman Catholics, but who were in fact still clinging on to their Judaism.
Some of the new Christians followed the Jewish custom of lighting a special candle before sunset Friday evening. That's when the Sabbath began, according to the Old Testament. In the eyes of the inquisitors, this lighting of Sabbath candles was damning evidence. The power of the Inquisition was subtle and insidious. The inquisitors urged people to spy on their friends, their neighbors, even members of their own families. They used threats and torture to coerce people to give evidence they needed. Hardcore heretics and repeat offenders faced the most extreme measures. They were turned over to the secular authorities for punishment. Some were burned in effigy. Others were burned at the stake, in person. The Spanish Inquisition spread its net wide and drew in others besides converted Jews. The Roman Catholic Church also included ex-Muslims. The inquisitors suspected them of secretly practicing Islam. And of course, Spain had to be protected from a storm of religious controversy that was brewing in the rest of Europe. That, too, was the business of the Inquisition.
I am Constantino. Oh God, can you hear me? Are there no cruel pagans? No bloodthirsty cannibals worse than ravaging beasts to whom you could deliver me, that I might escape these inhuman barbarians who keep me in this pit? Why am I here? Because of truth? Because of the Sabbath? I have loved your word. I have taught it faithfully. Am I to die here? In this hall?
Dr. Constantino Ponce de la Fuente was an immensely popular preacher and a gifted writer. He had traveled throughout much of Europe as chaplain to the imperial court. His peers held him in such high regard that he was elected magisterial canon of the great Cathedral of Seville, a huge Gothic structure that to this day ranks as the largest cathedral in the world. When Constantino preached, great crowds would pack the place to hear his sermons. But Dr. Constantino was a reformer, a particularly dangerous role to play in Seville, the very heart of the Spanish Inquisition. It was here that Constantino and a few of his colleagues adopted some rather un-Catholic views. While holding the highest office in the great cathedral, he, along with his friends, formed what he called the secret Christian church. Constantino believed that Christians should obey the 10 Commandments and that obedience is made possible through the gracious work of God in the Christian's life. In his opinion, obeying the 10 Commandments includes keeping the Sabbath on Saturday, the 7th day.
Understanding human nature and how easy it is for a man to forget him, God appointed a stated day to be offered to himself as a tithe, on which, unencumbered by other cares, man should offer, inwardly and outwardly, acknowledgement to the Lord who created him.
Members of the newly formed Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, became suspicious of Constantino after hearing his sermons. The office of the Inquisition repeatedly called him in to explain his teachings. His friends were concerned. He told them, "They want me to be burned, but they found that I am still too green." Officers of the Inquisition finally arrested him in August of 1558 and took him to the Inquisitors' prison just outside Seville. Cut off from his friends and supporters and from the crowds that used to fill the cathedral, Constantino Ponce de la Fuente suffered his last days in a pitiless death trap. There was no crowd to hear his final words when he died in February 1560, another victim of the Spanish Inquisition. Like Spain, neighboring Portugal also needed a solution to the problem of the so-called New Christians. There, the Inquisition began in 1536 and didn't finally end until well into the 19th century. Its 300 years of tyranny and oppression were marked by unspeakable cruelty and violence. Surviving records include long rosters of victims, meticulous accounts that document the human tragedies in short, cold summaries. One of this Inquisition's darkest chapters was written far from Portugal, way to the east in India. How, you might ask, did the Inquisition get there? Well, let me tell you. At the end of the 15th century, Vasco da Gama had sailed around the southern tip of Africa and on to India, opening up the sea route from the Atlantic coast of Europe all the way to the Orient. The Portuguese government quickly laid claim to key portions of India. It was a new world of opportunity. Eventually, many new Christians immigrated there, hoping to find a new life beyond the reach of the inquisitors.
The converts, or more properly referred to in Portuguese as the new Christians, started leaving Portugal and going to India, especially in the years 30 and 40 of the 16th century, primarily for religious reasons.
In 1542, Francis Xavier, one of the original Jesuit missionaries, arrived in Goa on the west coast of India. His purpose? To evangelize the people of the East. He soon discovered problems within the growing Roman Catholic population there.
St. Francis of Xavier indeed wrote a letter to his fellow priests, the Jesuits, stating that the Inquisition should be established in the East, because there were some people who claimed to be Catholics, but in reality inside they were Jews or Muslims.
Xavier died in 1552, but his appeal for an inquisition in the East did not die with him. In 1560, the Portuguese Inquisition came to India, headquartered in Goa. It specifically targeted Christians who refused to work on Saturday and who began observing the Sabbath on Friday evening as taught in the Bible.
Indeed, most of those being accused were of Jewish origin. The exceptions involved some people in the East who had no Jewish roots, but who observed, for instance, the Sabbath.
It may be that those Sabbath keepers who had no roots in Judaism are evidence of the local Indian Christians who had observed the Sabbath for hundreds of years, whose Sabbath customs dated back to the very first Christian churches in India. These local people weren't even Catholic, nor could they be called new Christians. But this didn't protect them from the long reach of the Inquisition of Goa.
I am Charles Delon, a physician and a citizen of France. Why am I here? A prisoner of the Inquisition. I am falsely accused, detained for no good reason. The accusations against me are the creations of my enemies. I am no heretic. Yet I have despaired of ever leaving this place. My only escape is death. So help me, I've tried to kill myself more than once. They want me to confess, but confess what? I have confessed again and again, but they want more. At least I'm not one of the new Christians. That's who they are really after. And I am not fortunate in any way, for I am caught here just as they are, and my end as uncertain as theirs.
We know about Charles Delon's case because he later wrote about it in detail. Accused of only trivial offenses, he was held for 2 long years before his trial. His judges banished him forever from India and sentenced him to 5 years as a slave laborer in the shipyards of Lisbon. He was more fortunate than most. Friends from France intervened on his behalf, and he won an early release from the Inquisitor General. In 1677, he returned safely to France, where he began to write about his nightmare as a victim of the Inquisition. In his account, he claims that a majority of those burned at the stake for Judaizing were not Jews at all, but Christians who kept the Sabbath.
Of 100 persons condemned to be burnt as Jews, there were scarcely 4 who professed that faith at their death, the rest exclaiming and protesting to their last gasp that they are Christians and have been so during their whole lives.
In 1684, Charles Delaune published his account of the Inquisition at Goa. The book reveals the operation of the Portuguese Inquisition from the viewpoint of a victim. You can check it out for yourself. It isn't a pretty picture.